stomach. Without a home for either of us, I found myself on your sheetless bed, watching the thing held in your hand, eating into the root of your want. Who were you thinking of when you let the damp wind in? You doused the ending in a glass filled with more endings. Mother asked where I was. I said home and offered her a lie. In a room not mine, your body not my terminus. Mother asked why I write what has been written so many times before. A family house leveled to the ground, a woman tortured by love, ending her life in an oven, her hair charred into the outline of a woman, another woman, another woman. You curled beside me, making the bed even more foreign, saying you weren't there, confusing rather with what was truth. Mother asked what's beautiful about poetry. A plum, a bird, a room with balcony, moss between rocks, pieces of leaves and grass. Mother asked what's poetic about pain, what's new about love. I counted each breath you released into the air, felt relieved when it returned. We all who have suffered, we all who have been lost. Occasion number 4. The girl hiding under the train seat for 2,000 miles ticketless was my mother, traveling from Xinjiang to Shanghai to stay with her grandma. The girl eating salmon niçoise in a West Village restaurant was me, when she heard Lebanon had been bombed. Someone at the dinner talked about his honeymoon in Hawaii, how the people there forced him to dance. In Chinese, if you want to say something is really funny, you say 笑死, meaning laugh to death. I stopped using that phrase after a girl at my cousin's school jumped off the building. The school officials deleted the news. Everyone pretended she had never existed. When my great-great-grandma bound my great-grandma's feet, she believed those lotuses would help her marry into a wealthy family. My great-grandma ended up marrying an opium eater. She had 8 children. The opium eater had 3 wives. Mother said her grandma had never washed her feet in front of her. She always hid them because she thought they stank. When great-grandma died, Mother was traveling in a jeep in Kenya, looking at lions through a very expensive telescope. A Chinese travel agent guided the tour. He held a small flag. When S told me C had jumped off a building and killed herself, I was laying over at Hong Kong airport. When S placed the bag containing all of C's limbs on the table in the funeral hall in Shanghai, I was waiting in line at JFK to enter America. S called me several times. I didn't pick up because phone was prohibited at border control. When Mother returned to her grandma's house, she found nothing but a dust-covered door. When Mother went searching for her childhood house, she found nothing but the drifting dust. The girl standing in line in silence for 2 hours was me, waiting to be questioned about my leaving. What of death and what of life? What of the one hand large enough to smother all remembering? Then it was my turn. I walked up. I offered him my everything. I wished the officer a good night. Occasion of acts. This is the 3rd time Mom has cried at family dinner. I know I'm not my brother, but at least can you let me finish my meal? The armors of the boiled shrimps shine like red coals next to the river eels alluring with curves. Mom recalls her head being banged against the wall by her mother, who wouldn't let her eat, because a daughter is not a son, a girl is not a boy, and this is especially true when there is famine. Though Grandma had starved herself too once, she went on hunger strike outside the government building to protest mass layoffs at her axe factory. False promises, she demanded. We want truth. Grandma made axes. She made axes all her life. I cannot imagine Grandma making axes. I cannot even visualize an axe. I've never seen an axe. The closest I can think of is a speculum once splitting the trunk of my body, entering between my legs. Occasion of breast. Whenever my dad says to me, "You're too skinny," I think of my great-grandma's missing breasts. How on New Year's Eve she would set her hair with parallel clips the way ballerinas do, put on her red cotton coat, sit in an armchair, and watch her sons play mahjong with cigarettes between their fingers while her daughters are busy in the kitchen. Then I heard she had cancer surgery. Since then, I found myself looking at her body more, trying to trace the hollowness under those layers, to unearth the loss as if it were buried there. In Chinese, breasts are called house of milk. Great-grandma had lost her house. By the day she died, she had lost all of her houses. I watched her body being carried away in a minivan with no windows, the barren land moving farther away than nothing. Occasion number 8. This one is about my high school back in China. The night after school had started, we shoveled earth to fill the pool so the boys would not see the girls in their swimsuits. We lined up, one after another, outside the storage room to claim the shovels. The sky above us also waited, purpled, glaring. Some mysterious creatures darted so fast over our heads like stitches. One said they were bats. Another said they were ghosts. I was told I had been given 3 days to break up with my boyfriend. On my way back to the dorm that night, my class teacher pushed his bike, walked parallel to my silence. He told me how poetry had no use in modern society and I absolutely needed to stop writing it, that I needed to forget about love, he said. You better be studying math and the core socialist values instead. Years ago, hundreds of people were hired to white out the banned phrases in the dictionaries with correction tapes. It's good that I'm finally here now. I have come a long way. Occasion number 9. My favorite Chinese poet is not coming to Berlin this year. She sends instead a video essay. On the salt-stained canvas of the screen, her face spreads an anxious mountain. 没拿到签证, she says, meaning she wasn't able to get the visa. Silence settles over the auditorium. Someone in a bandana shifts in their chair, adjusting their translator headsets with one hand. I realize I'm the only one in the room that does not need help to understand for this one time, and can I say, finally? Outside, the Berlin evening waits with its iodine face, forcing smiles at every end of the canal, coughing a little. All beers, visitors, young friends, residual breath of winter. I walk and think of how meaning arrives late, like luggage rerouted. The morning we cycled to a generic river looking like anybody's hair turning gray. In another European city, Budapest, Amsterdam, Utrecht. Another man at the airport control asked why I had come. I said study, I said poetry, I said love. But what I meant to say was, I've always been testing out the prospect of leaving, and my words do not coach your meaning. My words scatter, they piss at the corner and will flaunt their heads frivolously as they go. Another dawn, you will find me sitting at the edge of the line, my mouth busy trying the syllables you left with me. I will swallow all that don't taste like teeth. Okay, the last poem. It's inspired by the ocean, beach, and the sun, and the bugs here in Provincetown, especially the spiders in my really cute apartment. Okay. It's really lighthearted, so it's nothing too heavy, because I just thought it'd be better to end on a lighter note. To keep your memory, how much are you willing to pay for a cloud? The slim waist of the apple core rots to show me what it's capable of. 5 ants form a loop around my saliva, as if this were their last conviction. The ones I have let go yesterday follow me back as an aimless itch. If I were right all along, it must be the sun that is wrong. I am nothing but a chair in the sun, trapping in my own shadows with the weight of my own legs. What is urgent now is to write a poem that wanders, to hang it on a stranger's shelf and pray for it to dry surely like socks. By the end of September, I will have built a house out of pure words, and nothing will lie beyond that. Will you be ready? Will you come visit? Will you count the small mustache under my armpit and tell me again they are as transient as love? Will you be startled by the taste of the peach, sliced by hands that have just touched seawater? Thank you. Okay, next we'll have Lacey come up to introduce Domenick. Let's welcome Lacey.
That was so beautiful. Thank you. Really, really special. Okay. Oh, oops. Okay. So, it was shortly after the winter storm, and Domenick and I were walking up Commercial Street through the slush. He was telling me about the book he was writing, A History of Art in New York during the 2000s and 2010s. Why are you writing this book? I asked. Well, it sort of justifies all this time I spent just hanging around. Also, some asshole's gonna write this book sooner or later. I wanna be that asshole. And with 10 years as senior editor at Modern Painters and the Guggenheim, he is uniquely qualified to be just that. However, his first job was not in the office, but under the oculus at the base of the spiral, where he sold tickets at the cash register. His coworkers were artists, choreographers, and curators, and he loved talking to them about their work and lives. As a Virgo rising, Domenick is deeply intrigued with intelligent systems and highly skilled at sifting, dissecting, and compiling the information he acquires. Written in his own voice, he integrates his observations from key moments, studio visits, tiny gallery opening parties, and institutional flops of the early aughts. Neither insider nor outsider, he writes on the edge of a kaleidoscope whose borders constantly dissolve and reshape. I really look forward to reading his finished book. In the meantime, you should also subscribe to Domenick's bi-weekly newsletter, Spigot, the only art criticism I actually enjoy reading. Bursting out in laughter, usually, surprised by an exactiveness that doesn't take itself too seriously and remains human. Without further ado, please welcome Domenick Ammirati.
Thank you, Lacey. That was really, really great. And Lucie, you were also amazing. I'm just going to tinker with this a bit. Before I start, I just wanted to thank you all for coming. And I also wanted to just thank everyone at Falk. I've been here, this is my second term here, second year fellow. And I just really love it here, actually. And it's a great environment, and everyone is so nice and supportive and helpful who works here. So, and if you have money, you should give it to the Fine Arts Work Center. I genuinely talked to Terry, Devin, you know. I also wanted to say hello to Paige, who could not make it tonight, but she's been incredibly gracious over the past year, basically, when I've been out of town. So I miss you, and we'll see you soon. Now I'm going to read a piece that starts about how I met my ex-girlfriend. Total coincidence. And Okay, prefatory remarks. Yeah, so it's, Lacey did a good job of describing the book that I'm working on, and it sort of telescopes in and out between like personal firsthand experience and like kind of more locating analytic stuff about people I'm talking about. And that will be, in this text, that's gonna happen. So the first part is kind of more like narrative, and then it gets more like talking about art in a more specific way. If you get bored, I'll stop before that. And what else is there to say? Oh, one useful thing to say is that, well, I'm kind of worried about how this is gonna go over with people, not here, but in the people I've read about. But I do at one point to start, I use everyone's name except for the beginning where I refer to someone named Jay. And I think that's the only time that happens. Otherwise, should be pretty straightforward. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. This is like really awkward. It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon in March or April of 2009, and the woman I was seeing was angry at me. Perhaps it's better to say we were angry at each other, or I was angry at her. She was in Lake Havasu, Arizona, and I was trying to reach her by phone to no avail, straight to voicemail every time. She was angry, I would say, primarily because of a chemical imbalance in her brain. More proximately, she was still displeased about something that had occurred the previous year when I left town for a few months to work on the campaign to elect Barack Obama President of the United States. I had never really bothered to ask her if she minded. She had been apprised, of course, that I was applying for the job, so I had assumed she would have no objections when it came through, or would at least have voiced them prior to my having left, rather than over Skype calls across the country. Now, after some breaking up and a reconciliation over an ill-considered billiards game on a drizzly Valentine's Day, she had turned the tables and left me alone in New York, while she absented herself to one of the most famously trashy locales of Bush-era America. Giving her trip a veneer of respectability was the fact that she was there for a Hollywood film shoot by a young, acclaimed French director. Stripping that veneer clean to the splinters was the fact that she was tagging along on a 3D reboot of the 1980s franchise Piranha. Her sister was working as an associate producer for Alexander Asia, a princeling of quote-unquote French extremity, an epiphenomenal fashion for mixing Gallic ennui and Eli Roth-style gore. No doubt Asia fancied himself a synthesis of Godard, Baudrillard, and the auteur behind Girls Gone Wild. Jay had now been ducking me for perhaps 36 hours, with her phone now turned off in a gesture I could only assume was designed to gall me. My imagination runs toward the lurid, but in this case, that was no fun at all. And for some reason, I was heading to a party on a rooftop on the Bowery, south of Houston. I don't at all recall who was throwing it or why I was wandering lower Manhattan on a Sunday afternoon to begin with. Perhaps I had offered to feed Jay's parakeet, a strange and somewhat cruel Christmas gift from her sister, at her place near Washington Square Park. The party had mainly become the point on the map I stalked interminably toward while fuming. At the given address, I buzzed and trudged up 4 or 5 flights. I'm almost certain there's some grim gray glass condo or sad boutique hotel there now. The crowd was sparse, and I didn't know that many people, but the weather was like a shower of crystal. A woman across the way caught my attention with a large smile and a mane of black hair. She seemed happy, which, when I thought about it for a moment, there was no reason not to be. My entanglement with Jay ended soon after her return. Soon after that, I began communicating with intent with the black-haired woman, a photographer named Michelle. On the cusp of tourist season, she invited me to the opening in Chelsea of a group show she was in at Bellwether Gallery, whose press release featured a quote by Allen Ginsberg that, so far as I could tell, bore little relevance to any of the included work. Run by a graduate of Yale's MFA painting program, whom we all called Becky Bellwether, since her last name was the pedestrian Smith, the gallery had been a reliable place to poke a nose into throughout the aughts, more crafty than conceptual. This would turn out to be their last show before they went belly up, and, according to a time-honored category of allegation, owing money to lots of their artists. When I walked up to Bellwether's unfashionable location on 10th Avenue, the crowd was spilling well out onto the sidewalk. The show featured only 6 people, but all of them apparently had lots of friends. I was beginning to get the sense that Michelle was to be considered cool. That night, I left before finding her, but it was no matter. She and I had already decided that we would meet for a drink on that coming Sunday, just a few days later. We would rendezvous at a bar downtown, but she also dangled a second possibility, a late-night birthday party for a wealthy and pretentious gallery owner of my acquaintance. I had not been invited, unsurprisingly, nor was I familiar with the host, an artist named Margaret. The entreaty from Margaret that Michelle forwarded me went as follows. Dear friends, let's celebrate. Bring the family and bring some booze and some birthday cheer for 32 for Emily Sundblad. With a nice Sunday party somewhere around 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. on May 24th, 2009. With DJing Matthew Higgs, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., Tim DeWitt, 2 a.m. to 5 a.m., midnight performance by No Bra, 179, because she still performs around. 179 Canal Street, 2nd floor, between Mott and Elizabeth. Much love and see you soon. I was flattered that Michelle would chance taking me as her date to such an event. In fact, she didn't know Emily at all, though in just a few years, they'd be lying together shirtless on a rug in the latter's lush Greenwich Village apartment, declaiming fractured dialogue for a film by the artist Loretta Farrenholtz. I haven't told Michelle I'm writing about any of this, by the way, which is why I'm laughing. When Michelle sent me the final, the film would not be completed until 2021. When Michelle sent me the final cut, the passage of time made it too painful to watch. The curious convergence of social scenes promised by the announcement, how did the strange triangle of this unknown Margaret, the veteran Higgs, and the Bafo Araviste Emily come into alignment? It all added to the promise of the date, a genre of experience that is always animated by the possibility that it might crack open a new world. Michelle suggested we meet in a low-key bar that I had heard of but not visited. I'm not sure I ever returned, and today I can find no evidence that it ever existed, so I have to rely on my sole memory of it, which is admittedly peculiar. The interior, as I recall it, was pallid blue with matching carpet. The place seemed to have appropriated the design of the previous leaseholder because rather than a proper bar, it had a long Formica counter that included up front a display vitrine which held candy for purchase like at a multiplex. I probably bought some. I do have a bit of a sweet tooth. The strange layout and odd merchandise had the chic side effect of making the place feel like a drug or money laundering front. It recalled those dusty bodegas with a mysterious paucity of items and a broken freezer smell. The effect was childish and a little giddy. Red vines in the dive bar, truly anything could happen. We met on the early side. When I arrived, Michelle was already seated in a corner booth looking radiant. Yes, this phrase is a cliche, but one that I cannot avoid when I try to describe her. One of her traits was to appear to be radiating light. It was an effect of the dark hair juxtaposed with well-tended skin and good teeth. That's met with love. It was immediately clear that we were both pleased to see each other, a little excited. I missed that fluttery moment of mutual recognition with a potential romantic partner, a sexual interest. I see you. I don't know what we talked about for the next couple hours, but we surely started with the basics. She was from Bethesda, Maryland, point guard in high school and a forbidden college. Everyone thought her surname was Spanish, but in fact it was Ashkenazi. Yale MFA 2007. And who was I in spring 2009? A writer, I suppose you could say. A temporary posting at the Guggenheim had turned into a full-time job as senior editor. I paid $800 a month for half an apartment with a built-in sleeping loft and no heat in a massive old factory building in Brooklyn. We had one drink and then another. At a certain point, it became clear that our date was going well enough such that we would stick it out and attend the birthday party. To pass the time, one of us offered the other a Percocet or a Vicodin. Let's leave that responsibility joint and our influence forever mutually injurious, a setup that remains my most naive yet lasting vision of romance. When the time came, we made the short walk to 179 Canal Street. I realized upon arrival that I had already been there, and recently, my roommate, Josh, had organized a show on the 2nd floor a couple weeks earlier. We got buzzed in and tromped up to that very space, green tile and chandeliers, vacant from canal to the open space where tenants deposited their garbage. It turned out to have been a former brothel. I remembered little of the party, brains simmering and my attention elsewhere. It could have been empty, it could have been packed. I would surely have said hello to Emily in hopes of currying favor and stunting a bit by appearing at the function sans invitation. Michelle would no doubt have introduced me to our host, to whom I would have been warm. I can induce myself to recall a cheap folding table arrayed with bottles and dotted with solo cups. I can imagine the thin ring of circling Higgs' balding pate, head down and engrossed in his turntables. Knowing there were untenanted spaces on the floors above us, Michelle would soon be renting the tiniest studio I've ever seen 2 flights up. She took me to explore. All I really recall is melting into a dark, empty floor-through, suffused with the light of street lamps 4 and emergency bulbs in the rear. We reached a window over the air shaft and peered absently into the abyss. The vertigo was purely libidinal. We drew our heads back and stood nose to nose. Michelle's relationship with Margaret didn't have that much of a head start on mine. They had only met 6 months earlier in Joshua Tree, California, at an event called Swap Meet. The brainchild of sisters Amy and Wendy Yao, both of whom had roots in regional indie music and DIY scenes, it took place from 2004 to 2012 as part of a long-standing local flea market, at times as part of the art festival High Desert test sites. The Swap Meet was one of those cute boho fetishes that seemed always to thrive in the art scene of Los Angeles and wither in New York. From our vantage, the most profession-poisoned of cities, the notion of hawking items at a flea market in a town in the middle of the desert seemed not like a lark or community building, but rather the most horrifying possible outcome for a career. A yearning for the merging of art and life carves a sine wave through post-Warhol art history, but do you want to merge it like that? Young people flocked to New York, at least at that point, to get out of deserts, cultural and otherwise. Despite my bitchy notions, the Yao's event was successful, like a lot of their other ventures. Wendy, in particular, would become a pillar of the Los Angeles art scene as proprietor of Ooga Booga, a small boutique first in Chinatown and later at Laura Owens' 356 Mission. The shop sold a precise and ever-evolving selection of very good books, music, clothing, etc., while also hosting frequent events. It became a remarkably important dot on the Los Angeles and even national art map for about a decade, a fact that, in the abstract, seems like a parody of Americans' love of shopping. Michelle and Amy were friends from grad school. In 2008, which saw Swap Meet elevated to be part of that year's California Biennial, she accepted Amy's invitation to join the fun. There, on the weekend after the November election, Margaret and Michelle lucked into a perfect meet-cute, assigned booths side by side. Photos of the event show a couple of long, dusty wooden sheds in a barren landscape, populated by attractive young people in cutoffs and striped tops, cherry red empty Tecate cans dotting the scenery, with one stall offering a stack of chalky ingots shaped like gold bricks imprinted with the phrase white money. The whole thing must have been quite a bonding experience. Margaret herself later cited it as a crucial moment of crystallization in her thinking about what galvanic role she might be able to play in the New York art world. A number of Swap Meet artists would end up showing at the gallery she would found, 47 Canal. These included Amy, Michelle, Annika Yi, and Josh Klein, my aforementioned roommate. These last two appeared in the guise of their collaboration Circular File, which contributed the blanched ingots. The lesson so well illustrated here is, if you're trying to social climb, and who isn't, however tastefully, it's imperative to take any opportunity to spend time in that milieu in a novel context, and the more miles traveled, the better. Hotels are psychically expansive, and people are so clenched tight in their everyday lives. On a jaunt to a fake Swap Meet, an exhibition opening, or, in the archetypal case, a wedding, carnival rules start to apply. You may be seated next to someone at dinner you've always thought was an idiot and come away unswayed, but if you can commiserate over the quality of the roast chicken, you might at least offer smiles the next time you see each other. And lo, an acquaintance may become a friend who then may ask you to split rent on a studio, or contribute to a magazine they're editing, or show at a gallery they're opening, or be in an exhibition they organized 3 years down the road when they've finally gotten a museum job with a smidgen of clout. Your presence by the pool in these idols validates you as part of an elect, defined not only by finances, but also by will, by showing up. My happiness would end up being intimately tied up with that of 47 Canal, and so Margaret and I became first dedicated allies and soon friends. It's hard to describe how I got to know her, because that didn't really happen. There was no getting to know her. We simply didn't know each other, and then we did. When Margaret met you, she established her personality at the outset, and there were no trap doors or jump scares. She grew up in Yonkers, the daughter of South Korean emigres who opened a corner store when they got to the U.S. They named her after Margaret Thatcher, which, despite being infinitely more likely to lead a strike than break one, Margaret did take a bit of pride in. And she possessed the entrepreneurial grind set needed by someone who would end up diving into a quixotic business during a period of economic gloom. In a 2000 press release for her own solo debut at New York solo debut at Jack Hanley Gallery, she wrote, "This economy forces double fisting sometimes, but mostly triple or quadruple. How much can you carry? I have 17 keys on my keychain, and this show was made on stolen time." One of those keys was to Cindy Sherman's studio. She was Sherman's sole employee, a posting she rarely referenced. Like myself, Margaret enjoyed sports, particularly, and to her emotional detriment, the New York Knicks. Between the city's luckless basketball franchise, the proving grounds of contemporary art, hot gossip, and the business of running a gallery, she and I always had something to yak about. Life is never all charmed, of course, but from the outside, watching her navigate these years of getting 47 Canal off the ground while making her own art and running the studio of the world's most famous living photographer, it always seemed like she knew exactly what she was doing. And unlike most people, I knew who she was. But before there was 47, there was 179, the space where Margaret had, for me, so propitiously feted Emily's Sunblad. The building was the site of a small office that she kept as part of her work for Sherman. She had secured the large space on the second floor by taking advantage of still low post-crash rents, fire damage vacancies, and by being a more desirable tenant than its seedy previous occupants. Also, she scored a discount by paying up front in cold hard cash. Margaret has always been a bit of a hustler. Parties like the one Michelle and I attended could be a hassle. Even on the most chaotic street in New York, someone will call in a noise complaint. And so for this and the loftier visions that had first descended upon her in the desert, she shifted the venue's focus to art. It would be a stepping stone to the gallery, 47 Canal, it would be a stepping stone to the gallery, and like 47 Canal, its name would simply be its address. The first presentation at 179 had been the one that had already drawn me there, curated by Josh and called Nobody's New York. It ran for only 3 days at the beginning of May 2009 and featured a cast of characters that would form the core of 47 Canal's initial roster, including Klein, Amy Yao, Yi, Antoine Catala, Alyssa Barenboim, and Trevor Shimizu. The show also featured Margaret herself. The most lasting contribution of the Grotti exhibition would be its tone-setting press release, written by Klein and designed in the impossibly clunky manner of what must have been the Windows default mail software of the time. In a striking anticipation of Lee's Jack Hanley release, class and financial crisis are major themes. There just isn't enough credit available to fake it with the upper middle class anymore, Klein pointedly noted. In her text, Margaret wrote, "This economy forces double fisting." Here, Josh wrote, "Multitasking really means working while you eat lunch." And P.S., we're broke, so BYOB. Klein's text also offhandedly announced a transition that was about to take place within art, one in which 47 Canal was, in my opinion, to play a key role. Adopting the omnipresent language of resume building, Josh wrote, "This short show looks at the painting skill set and the sculpture skill set and the dark comedy skill set. Informal attire for informal situations during informal times." This dressing down of affinities for various forms and mediums ran counter to the art of the preceding decade and its emphasis on Octoberite, self-reflexive medium specificity. October is an influential, pretty academic art journal. The gap would only widen between that work and the works that Klein and the other slightly younger artists would begin producing. One is encouraged to read his informal here as less strict, tending toward pop or popular or even populist in the non-toxic sense, ultimately based more around subject matter than formal involutions. Klein himself has always had a desire to reach audiences outside art's narrow, professionalized ones. And don't ignore the perhaps unconscious pun. The informal art of Klein and his peers opposed the formal, the formalist, really anything that was ossified into a familiar shape. Klein's statement was a typical, if low-key, expression of a changing of an artistic guard, hemmed in by the notion that Americans were increasingly trapped at lower levels of the wage scale, whether they worked in gray-collar computer jobs or hauled packages for Amazon. The fact that the show opened on International Workers' Day was not left unmentioned. Over the course of its single-year run, 179 would host numerous events and exhibitions. Emily and Margaret would reunite under the aegis of the live arts biennial Performa for what was little more than another party called Better Raves Club. Matthew Higgs would once again be spinning his typical loft-style house or new wave obscurities, he, a man who would never miss a chance to note that he had once met Ian Curtis. Emily would warble some Swedish chansons, she was getting better, and alcohol would be gratis. In the form of vodka synthesized that very week at the Swiss Institute by the artist Ylva Öglund, who used the Institute's space to distill the spirit from champagne and filter it through rubies. Well, that sounded romantic, and I did have a favorable impression of Öglund from an encounter at a run-of-the-mill opening where I had the distinct sense, sadly processed only in retrospect, that she and her boyfriend were hitting on me, and this event had an extremely horny flyer featuring a tanned youthful trio of what appeared to be 70s naturists, and it's being part of something called the Lust Weekend related to the obscure futurist Valentine de Saint-Poix. I did not make it. It was on a Sunday night, which is a time I preferred to use to mope. It took me until 2016, when I was living in Greece and regularly exposed to British English, to realize that the fatally terrible title had been a pun on the characteristically silly English term for beats. 179 Canal hosted solo presentations by several artists who would show at 47 Canal, Katala, Shimizu, the duo Kaya, comprising Debo Eilers and Kirsten Broch. It also featured music by the likes of the amiable but regrettably tuneless darkwave duo Zeno and Oaklander, who put out music on the painter Peter Schoolworth's Weird Records label. The final event that took place in the space on June 25th, 2010 was something called The Dud of a Diamond-Studded Collar by Guy Benfield and Constanza Zikos, described impenetrably, and with yet another allusion to money, as a 1/long night mock duck performance event perpetuating gold bricks through the sounds of crossover. At that moment, Margaret could have used a few gold shavings herself to stave off 179's landlord. The swan song took place after the lease had run out. Per Margaret, with her fatality, this one is under the radar. I'm not paying rent on the space, so you get it. The door is open, AC will probably be on, and smoking is always allowed. Thanks.
Thank you, Lucie and Domenick, for those wonderful readings. I just have a few announcements before we wrap up. Nick and Yassine's two-person show, Tether, will be on view in the gallery until Sunday, March 1st. So please tell your friends and come back with them to check it out one more time. Our next Fellow Friday event will take place on Friday, March 6th at 5 p.m. and will feature exhibitions by visual fellows Dominique Munoz and Lacey Black. And yeah. And readings by poetry fellow Nico Amador and fiction fellow Robbie Herbst. Yeah. You can learn more about our Fellow Friday events on our website. However, to learn more about our fellows, I urge you to read their profiles in the Provincetown Independent that are published in the weeks leading up to their showcases. I'll end by giving a huge thank you to the Independent, their writers, their editors, and photographers for their continued support and coverage of our fellows and their work. That's all, folks. Have a good night. Thank you for coming.
All fellows and staff, please join me in Nick's exhibition. All fellows and staff, please come to Gallery B for a group photo to send to Nick. Thank you.